For those who just joined, did you have any issues getting on? Please let me know. I just disabled the passcode because some people had some issues.
No issues here.
Thank you.
Are we up on Facebook Live?
We should be. Can you check for me? I just
Absolutely.
clicked live. Should be.
You are.
Awesome. See, the numbers are steadily increasing. So I'm just gonna give it one more minute before we get started. It's now 3:08. All right, I'm gonna get ready to begin. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us here today. My name is Kiva Muller. I am the communications manager here at the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority. And on behalf of my director, Sarah Griffith, who you'll hear from in just a minute, and the entire HFA and CDBG, DR, and mitigation team, I want to welcome you to today's mitigation public hearing to talk about the action plan. Director Griffith.
Thank you, Mrs. Muller. And just want to say welcome to everyone. This is our third and final CDBG Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Town Hall public hearing. You're going to hear a lot of great information about how we can use this $774 million to make the Virgin Islands a stronger, more resilient community for all sorts of natural disasters, not just hurricanes, but droughts, earthquakes. And you'll see how we scored the different risk associated with the disasters hitting the territory. I ask for your attention. We ask for your questions, comments, criticisms.
Okay.
And Steve, I can hear you.
Sorry.
So we ask for your questions, your comments, criticisms, anything that can be done to improve this action plan, because this is a community process, and with your input, this is going to make this the best document and the best plan we have for the Virgin Islands to help mitigate us from future disasters. So I just thank you for taking out the time today during your schedule to do that. It's time that's going to be well spent. The VIHFA, Housing Finance Authority's team has put together a very good presentation for you. So please give us your attention and let us know what we can do to make this even better. Mrs. Muller, it's back to you.
Thank you. So today's presenters are going to be, well, me, I'm hosting. You'll also hear from Mr. David Martin, our Chief Disaster Recovery Officer. Also hear from Mrs. Fleming, our CDBG-DR Director. And you'll hear from Mr. Andrew Thorley, the Tetra Tech Project Manager. So our meeting objectives today are: one, we're going to review the CDBG-MIT Action Plan draft. We're going to talk about what MIT is, what is an action plan, and how do they go together. We're also going to discuss those proposed project activities that are in the plan and talk about how the funding is allocated. And then we're going to hear back from you guys. It's the comment process. We want you, this is the main reason we're here today. We want your feedback, your comments, and we just want to know what you think about our proposed plan to spend the money. If you think we are on the right track, or if you have some concerns about some program areas, that will be the time that you voice your comments and feedback. So the Mitigation Action Plan, what is CDBG-MIT? What is the action plan? So the authority was appropriated $774 million from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. You guys know it as HUD, for disaster mitigation through a community development block grant, what we refer to as CDBG-MIT. So you've also heard of the regular CDBG that is a yearly annual allotment that we get here at Housing Finance Authority for community projects. And then most recently, in the last 2 to 3 years, you've heard about CDBG-DR, which is disaster recovery. So this is a new set of funding that will address mitigation, and it's similar but a lot different than disaster recovery, because disaster recovery is more reactive in nature, meaning we get those funds because we had a hurricane, and mitigation is being proactive in nature and making sure that we mitigate against future events. So MIT funded activities, like I kind of mentioned, will lessen the impact of disasters by creating and increasing resiliency to current and future hazards. So however, before funds can be drawn down from HUD, we, the territory, must submit a detailed plan of action. That's why we're here today, based on input gathered from residents. So if you were with us throughout this journey, over the summer, we had 3 town hall or public input meetings in June, July, and August, where we try to get your ideas on what do you think we should be planning for in terms of future hazards. So we took all of that information from those meetings. We hired a team. Well, we hired the team before the meetings, Tetra Tech, to draft the plan. So based on the input that you guys gave, they drafted the plan, and now we're back out to you guys with the plan in hand, asking again for your approval before we send it to HUD for their approval. So that's why we're here today in a nutshell. And then I'm going to pass it on to Antoinette. She is our DR director, and she's going to give you a DR overview. And then we'll move forward from there. Antoinette?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Kiva said, I'm here to give you an overview on CDBG-DR. So the 2 back-to-back Category 5 hurricanes that happened back in September of 2017, we all know them as Hurricane Irma Maria, caused significant destruction in the territory. When we woke up after the hurricanes passed, we woke up to a lot of housing that were impacted, damaged, roads that could not be passed, that's infrastructure, power lines down, trees down, and the economy, businesses were closed and they couldn't get back up and did not get connectivity to operate their businesses. With that destruction in the territory, HUD, the Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Recovery, provide funding for unmet needs after FEMA, that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, funds, insurance funds, and other federal or private sources are accounted for, with a focus on the needs, especially to the low and moderate income residents here in the territory and the businesses. This money is managed or administered by the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority, and the spending is prioritized in programs designed through the CDBG Action Plan and our subsequent amendments that may follow thereafter. This plan provides a portfolio of programs to address unmet needs in housing, public services, public facilities, infrastructure, and economic needs. Now, the CDBG-DR funds are intended by HUD to address, as I said before, in tranche 1 and tranche 2, and I'll tell you more about that in the next slide, unmet needs from Hurricane Irma Maria. The next set of funding that we're going to talk about, what we're all here to hear about, is the mitigation activities. And these activities are to protect the territory from damages of future events. These events don't not only include hurricanes, but they include a tsunami, an earthquake. It is just future events that may impact the territory. Next slide, please. So everyone may have heard that we received $1.9 billion, but the territory did not receive this money all in one allocation. What we did receive is what we call tranches, and every tranche or every allocation, we were required to write an action plan. We were required to amend it if we are making changes to that plan. So what you see before you is a breakdown of the allocation. The first allocation was received in 2018 of 242 million. The second allocation was the 779 million. And the third allocation, or 2A, is the $53 million, which was just a supplemental appropriation for infrastructure unmet needs. That total right now is $1.75 million. The mitigation funds, the reason why we're here today, is a total of $774 million. That total, including what I've mentioned above, is $1,850,000. Now, HUD will issue a separate allocation to address the electrical power system. And when that system, we will again come before you, the public, to advise you on the status of our grants. So with that said, I will turn the conversation over to Mr. David Martin, and he will give you information on the definition of a mitigation and what mitigation projects should look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Antoinette. As Antoinette mentioned, the next few slides, I'm going to talk to you about a definition, which you see right in front of you, a new timeline for the action plan, and then finally some goals. From a definition and from that perspective, what is the focus? It's to lessen the impact of future disasters. And for me, the how is increasing resilience to disasters and reducing or elimination of long-term risk. And the problem that we're trying to solve is simple: loss of life, injury, damage to, and loss of property, and suffering and hardship. So the key takeaway on this slide is the extension of the action plan due date, to January 4th, 2021. And of course, that's due to the pandemic. And then finally, let's talk about goals for CDBG-MIT. One, support data-informed investments with a focus on repetitive loss of property. Two, building capacity to comprehensively analyze disaster risk. Three, to support the adoption of policies that reflect local and regional priorities. And then finally, it's about maximizing the impact of funds and leveraging private and public partnerships and coordination with other federal funding sources.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. So the spending timeline for mitigation, and I'll compare this to DR. So DR has a timeline. When I say DR, if you're not familiar, it's disaster recovery, all CDBG funds. DR's timeline is 6 years from the signing of the grant agreement. For us, it's not going to be 6 years. It's going to be more than that because our expenditure deadline would have been 2024 from a 2018 grant signing agreement. But because of the COVID pandemic, HUD granted all of the grantees of DR funds an extra year. And then they also gave the grantees an option to extend for another year based on their needs. So we already got the automatic 1-year extension that brought us to 2025, and then we agreed to submit paperwork so that we can extend for another year. So that will be 2026 for DR funds. So mitigation funds have a 12-year timeline to spend all of the funds, which is a whole lot different. But we're in for the long haul. It's being proactive in the event of future hazards. So any kind of mitigation activities will need extensive work to include a real-time data assessment of all the data that backs up everything that we want to do. So it's not going to be a quick fix because we're thinking long term. But of course, 50% of the funds should be expended in 6 years. So we are here for a long time. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Andrew Thorley, who will actually go right into the action plan and how we plan to allocate funding for mitigation. Andrew?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kiva. As outlined in the draft action plan, the CDBG fund allow the territory to carry out strategic and high impact activities that are designed to help the territory prepare for future losses. And those losses could be disasters like hurricanes or other identified risks. A big portion of the action plan involves what we call a mitigation needs assessment, where we look into the likelihood of risks in the territories and how they are impacted in the future so that we can make determinations on project areas that are linked to the actual risks. As you can see here, there are 4 primary activities that have been identified following that mitigation action plan. And they are, as you see here on the screen, infrastructure and public facilities, housing, economic revitalization, and planning and public services. Keep in mind that the funds here allow us an opportunity to also improve local planning protocols and procedures within the territory as well. And I'll explain a little bit further what those look like in future slides. Next, please. This outlines a little bit in more detail the allocation that is currently set up within the draft action plan. You'll see that much of the needs here that have been linked to improved infrastructure and public facilities. Housing also has a significant portion, as does economic resilience and revitalization, which is an important part of the plan given the importance of the pandemic that affects all of our lives. And that is a part of the risk assessment that we have done. You'll also notice that public facilities and planning and administration are part of the mix as well. Current plans have most of those funds, as you can see here, allocated to infrastructure and public facilities. Within public facilities and infrastructure, you'll see 2 sub-programs. So the total allocation currently considered is over $400 million, or approximately 54%. We expect over 100 million of that to go specifically to community resilience and public facilities. The remaining 315 will go to resilient, critical, and natural infrastructure projects. And we'll give you a little bit more detail on what that looks like as we continue. You'll notice also that economic resilience and revitalization is at 10%, housing at 25%. We also have allocated funds here intended to go for public services, planning, and administration. And the next few slides will go into a little bit more detail about what that looks like and what those things mean. Next slide, please. So let me briefly explain both resilient, critical, and natural infrastructure, as well as community resilience and public facilities. So that total of 418 million goes into both of those. So infrastructure and public facilities include things like multi-purpose facilities for shelters, for helping in disasters. We can use it also to upgrade existing infrastructure. So that might be roads, that might be improved infrastructure to decrease flooding. Hurricane and riverine flooding were 2 of the highest risk areas that were identified within the action plan. And so the majority, if not all, of the projects that have been identified for funding are linked to those risks. And so it would make sense that we would improve infrastructure in order to compensate for those potential risks. And that's why a large portion of the intended funding is designed to go into these two areas. Next slide, please. So housing, of course, is a critical component of the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority's mission. And as a complement to already existing housing priorities within the disaster recovery funding, housing has also been identified as a risk that needs to be considered and improved within mitigation. So the majority of the funding here is going to go to improving multifamily housing to the tune of over $100 million. With 61 million going to new home construction initiatives for new homeowners, 23, almost 24 million for improving the situation for the homeless within the territory, and the remaining approximately 5 going for what we call innovative resilient housing, which is a program that is designed to help those who are living here in the territories be prepared for future disasters with temporary options to help folks whose homes may be damaged. We look forward to seeing how those funds are going to be applied. As within the other area of funding, the amount of funding has been set, but there will be application materials that are required in order to make final decisions on how funding will actually be applied. Go ahead and go to the next slide now. The next area at almost 10% is for economic resilience and revitalization. That's a significant area for the territory, especially given the impact of the current coronavirus pandemic. Within the economic resilience and revitalization component, almost 40 million, close to 41, will go for commercial hardening and financing, with the remaining 35 tabbed to go to small business mitigation. That means that we're interested in looking at options for improving commercial infrastructure places, such as might be used in potentially Crum Bay to make it another staging area to receive additional supplies following a hurricane, to improve potentially opportunities for what we call improving, sorry, I'm having a reception issue here on my network, potentially for improving commercial facilities for dry docks or for other things. There's a lot of potential there in that location that might be great for commercial hardening and financing. As far as small business mitigation goes, there are a variety of options that are identified as priorities within the plan so that we can help those who are small business owners have options to be prepared against future disasters and improve the economy. Next slide. So whenever there's an opportunity like this, where there is funding that can be helped for looking at ways the territory can be improved, planning is a key component of that. We can look at local and regional land use plans, master plans, and various plans that are helpful for the territory to think about the best ways to use those funds. CDBG-MIT provides a unique opportunity to do that, looking at things even like building codes or zoning ordinances. That is part of the purpose of planning ahead to make sure that the territory is better prepared for disasters. Another component of this allocation is also for public services. Many times nonprofits are able to serve needs here in the community that government entities are not able to do as efficiently or as quickly. And so having options for public services so that the nonprofit organizations are able to improve the lives of the territory makes a huge difference. While these are different components within the overarching plan, I think it's significant to notice that there is a good amount of monies that have been tabbed for use in these two areas. With that said, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a return of the overall breakdown of how the activities are intended to be allocated. You'll notice at the bottom, there is space within yellow there for administration. One of the things that Housing and Urban Development expects, and rightfully so, is that these monies are to be used appropriately. And that requires a lot of work on the administration side by the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority and other entities to make sure that monies are used properly and that we can account for the way that those monies are spent. And that requires manpower and staffing. The Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority will need to make sure that it has enough folks that are on the ground able to do all the work that's required. And that's why that administration budget is what it is. Because if we're to get things moving along, and Kiva spoke briefly earlier about the timeline for spending that HUD expects and is necessary to get things done, we have to have sufficient manpower to make sure that those things function and that work is being done properly in accordance with established guidelines. Next slide. So you'll notice that this is a timeline, okay? The timeline for the CDBG-MIT Action Plan started some time ago. We've been doing stakeholder outreach for a considerable amount of time. That has been delayed a little bit because of the coronavirus. We're getting better at doing that by Zoom call and by other means. But the idea is to get public input into what's being done here, to make sure that we have input from the public on what the priorities should be in developing the action plan. And so we've been doing that for a considerable amount of time. We're now in that second to last box where we talk about responding to and incorporating public comments. That's a big reason for us having this meeting and the other meetings that we've held, so that we can incorporate the feedback from the public into the final action plan that'll be submitted to HUD before January 4th, 2021. We hope that we're able to do and get a lot of good things done, but that requires cooperation from the public to know what the priorities really need to be. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the time back over to Kiva so that we can then be back open to doing those, getting that public input. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So we have arrived at the most important part of the conversation, and that is we want to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, feel free to do so. But before that, I just want to talk about the ongoing stakeholder input. This is a third public hearing. We had two before the Thanksgiving holiday, and it's being conducted to receive comments and feedback after the action plan had been published. Like Andrew said, it's a 45-day comment window, and it is closed on December 22nd, and that gives us some time to incorporate all of your comments into the action plan before we submit to HUD by January 4th. If you are not comfortable or you're not prepared to make any comments, or you need to review the plan a little bit more, you can always feel free to submit your comments and feedback to mitigation@vihfa.gov up until December 22nd. So right now we'll start taking comments, but before you do that, I'll allow you to speak, or you can use the chat room. I'll be screening comments there as well. But if you do want to give a verbal comment, please state your name for the record. First and last name, or first will do. Also, if you are associated with an organization, and then you have about 4 minutes per person to state your comment. Like I said as well, if you would like to just type your comment out in the chat feature, feel free to do so. I will be in the chat room as well, and I will verbally announce your comments. Also, we encourage you to take the CDBG-MIT survey. It's on our website, vihfa.gov, on the pop-up box that shows up there, or you can go to the CDBG-DR.vihfa website. And if you click the mitigation tab, all of the information on mitigation is there, as well as the survey. So I will start taking questions now. If you would like to speak, go right ahead and unmute yourself. State your name and an organization you represent, if any.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barbara Walsh. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Barbara. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good. And I'm here today representing the Virgin Islands Trail Alliance. And I was wondering if the information boxes that Andrew Thorley presented are on the website, because I wanted to review those again.
Repeat that?
So Andrew Thorley just spoke, and he was explaining different categories, and I would like to review those categories. So there they are. So I can find that on the website then.
Yes, so this presentation, well, another version, a lengthier version of this presentation with more text from the action plan, but not necessarily the action plan, is on our website under the mitigation tab. So the action plan is there, and that that presentation in a PDF format does have this graphic on there with the project and program areas and the allocation.
Okay, thank you. I had a question about if someone could explain resilient, critical, and natural infrastructure.
Oh,
I
sure.
wondered if, okay, thank you.
And we'll also post this version of the presentation online. Andrew, would you like to take that one up? Resilient, critical, and natural infrastructure at the tune of 315 million.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
You have a little echo, but I think it's fine.
So the distinction between community resilience and public facilities and critical natural infrastructure is a significant one, right? So the resilient, critical, and natural infrastructure speaks more to looking at things like roads or water lines or things that are necessary for community support. Some of them are natural and some of them are things that we have built onto the natural world. But all of the projects that are anticipated for funding here would be those that are tied to either community lifelines that FEMA has outlined, or, and sometimes, the identified risks that are within the mitigation needs assessment. I think if you, while the actual action plan itself is a detailed one, I think you'll find that it's spelled out very clearly and very well in more detail that you might need within the actual action plan that's posted on the website. Hopefully that's helpful as kind of a backdrop.
Okay, I understand the critical part, and I guess, could you explain the natural part? What do you mean by natural infrastructure?
Andrew, this is Antoinette. I'm going to take a stab at the response. So it may not necessarily be a natural infrastructure, but a part of the natural and, a part of the infrastructure and public facility line item here. We're also looking at, we're surrounded by water on an island, and some of our roadways are along shorelines. And at times during and after hurricanes, those roadways get a lot of debris from the ocean and other factors that prevent us from using those roadways. So we have to look at what we do with making those roadways very resilient to the impacts that were a result of the natural disaster. Is it increasing the shoreline? Increasing the height of the bulkhead that where the roads are on? We're looking for anything that can help us be resilient. We do not have the specific response right now, but these are eligible project program titles that we're looking for a particular project to meet that definition.
So for instance, would something like hazard mitigation in the guts, would that be considered a natural infrastructure if we start to try to control the storm water coming down through the guts, as an example?
That is an example, yes.
Okay, and what about like pedestrian walkways? Would that be considered critical infrastructure or natural? Is it resilient or natural? Or maybe it doesn't matter. I'm just curious.
So the walkways, even natural or paved by itself, may not meet the definition of mitigation, but if you combine the resilient, critical, and natural infrastructure project that has something such as a pedestrian pathway, may be an eligible way of looking at it, but by itself, it may not.
I see. Okay. And then in the planning, it seems like there's planning in different parts of the whole plan. Like for instance, at the bottom in yellow, that's like administrative planning, right? But then you also mentioned somewhere in here money for land use plans and that type of thing. So is that two different sections or all
No,
one?
it is the same.
It's
The
the
line
same.
item that's shaded in yellow is the planning activity. Under mitigation and under DR, we can do a series of planning events or planning projects that look at our infrastructure, that looks at our zoning laws, that looks at different things that needs to go in a shelf document that can be implemented by an entity of the local government or an entity, just the whole territory itself. So
Right.
it becomes a shelf document.
And
And
Ms.
also
Wall,
planning includes the funds for the DR program and the mitigation program to operate. Sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
no, I apologize. I was just going to say, even though that both of those are listed as yellow, they are two different categories. While there is some overlap between the two, the planning is really for planning. Administration is more for overseeing the way that the programs and the activities will be run. So administration goes more to taking care of the people and the work that's required to make sure that the activities are carried out appropriately. Whereas planning has a much more broader use to look at a wide variety of things depending on what the territory really needs.
So the planning section in yellow would incorporate historic and all those,
Conservation.
they would include the things on the other slide where it talked about land use and historic preservation
Yes.
Correct.
under planning. So
And as
this,
Antoinette was saying, it could be a variety of things.
so when you say this, just it says description and planning, and it talks about all the different kinds of plans that would come under the yellow planning in the chart.
That is correct.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the chat room. So if you're gonna say something, hold 1 second. We have a few questions here. Oh, it's a lot of questions. Okay, Anna Francis, I'm sorry, asked, in what ways will the department be able to help nonprofits? And I'm going to join that with the other question directly after by Frandel Gerard, asking, regarding public services and support for nonprofits, what is the definition of public services for vulnerable populations? So I actually have up a document that's on our website, which establishes the public services and facilities sector, and it actually gives a definition on what is a public facility and on public services. So I will go ahead and read that, and then I'll let someone else jump in and talk about in what ways the department will be able to help nonprofits. So this actually comes from our latest amendment to our DR Action Plan, which creates the public services and facilities sector. And it states, public facilities are defined as publicly owned facilities or buildings owned by nonprofits or agencies that are open to the public or serve persons with special needs. Examples of publicly owned facilities are libraries, recreational facilities, parks, or playgrounds. Examples of buildings owned by nonprofits or agencies are homeless or domestic violence shelters, nursing or group homes, or health clinics. So that's public facilities. And public services are activities undertaken to provide unemployment training, childcare, health services, substance abuse treatment and counseling, educational programs, fair housing counseling, and services for senior citizens and others. So that's the definition that we have here. So maybe Andrew or Antoinette, someone can talk about how will we be able to help nonprofits?
That's a good question. Yeah, you explained public services well. That defines it very well. And then as far as helping nonprofits, the action plan does outline who the eligible entities are for each program. And so you can see there that nonprofits are eligible for to apply when the time comes to several of these programs that we've just discussed, whether it's aspects of housing, economic revitalization, and public services, I think in particular.
Okay. Let me go on to the next question. From Jonathan Tucker, can the plan include funding for the expansion of VINGN fiber network infrastructure? Especially can mitigation include funding for burying aerial VINGN fiber? I hope I read that correctly. Jonathan, if you want to unmute yourself and explain, you can, but I'll read it once again. Can the plan include funding for the expansion of VINGN fiber network infrastructure? Or can MIT include funding for burying the aerial VINGN fiber?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So Kiva, before we go on to say yes or no, we can entertain that type of activity. We just want to again go back to the definition. An activity that's able to meet the definition of mitigation, allow us to be resilient. If the project that you're proposing or describing can meet that definition, then it is something that we can entertain.
If I may, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes.
I can, sir.
The VINGN fiber right now is basically aerial from the Ivana Udoracan High School coming to the Bureau of Internal Revenue's Red Hook facility. After the hurricane, the facility was offline because of that fiber was on the ground. If the VINGN could receive funding to bury that fiber, that would help the Bureau and taxpayers because our systems would be online, continue to be online in the event of a hurricane. It was a major issue after the hurricane, and it took us many weeks to restore the service. So yes, it would indeed add to the resilience of the government's infrastructure if that was something that could be done. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the comment.
And Jonathan, I'd also encourage you to, we are recording the comments here, but if you could do a nice write up to the mitigation email, if you have any additional, resources that you would like to cite, we'll appreciate that.
No problem.
Okay.
Antoinette? It's Antoinette?
Hi, who's speaking?
Hi.
Oh, this is Sheila Scullion on St. Croix. And I wanted to ask, could there be a creation in the government for someone who is focused on the care of the trees and possibly planting flowers just to really beautify the island? I don't know that there's an actual department that really also could provide leadership after a hurricane, because I know there was a whole lot of confusion around cutting trees and wires and all that kind of thing, and it didn't seem as if anybody was really in charge of that. But the island would benefit so much from the flowers in certain places or the trees, and I'm sure that would be like a phenomenal job for the right person. That's one concern. And then also I wanted to ask, how much was set aside for the planning for the homeless population?
So, hi, Sheila. This is Antoinette Fleming. The first question that you asked is about who can help with, I guess, planting of trees and, I guess, after a
Flowers.
I'm thinking more on the lines of Department of Agriculture and a coalition with UVI to some degree. You may want to call them and ask them about their plans after disaster for beautifying back the territory. But on this venue right now, we're talking about mitigation and how the territory overall can be resilient for future storms. The next comment you had about, you were talking about what monies are available for planning for homeless services. And if you look on the screen right now, planning is allocated at 4% of the total allocation for mitigation at about $32 million. So it will
$32 million for the planning.
Yes, the planning is overall planning activities, but it is not planning only for homeless services or homeless. It is planning for planning activities related to mitigation.
Right, because one really important part of it is not only for the buildings themselves, but also for 24/7 staffing, if possible, with security. That would be very wise in light of the future.
So one of the things that's really good with this chat is that you have everybody from different minds and different locations. And Grinnell from UBI mentioned that the idea of beautification could be proposed to folks at the tourism, because tourism has a DR grant to do the Vision 2040, and they have Department of Tourism also has funding from DR for the Tourism Master Plan. So if beautification could not be addressed from the two entities I mentioned of agriculture or UVI, Greg is proposing that we look at both ED and tourism and the planning activities they are doing.
Well, with respect to your experience, do you know any key individuals, like with Clarice Clark, or any key people that would know the local flowers and the planting of trees? Is there any key people that or you think the university would be the best place to find?
No,
or Department of Agriculture.
So what Greg is saying is we try to reach out to EDA and Department of Tourism, because they're both working on various plans to help beautify and help chart the territory when it comes to economic resiliency and other factors related to tourism market. I do not have a name specifically in tourism. The only name that I can really give you from EDA is Ms. Peterson, Janelle Peterson from EDA. I do not have her on me, but if you call the EDA office and ask for Ms. Peterson, you may want to have that conversation about what you're just describing.
Okay, all right, thank you, good.
And team, we're seeing some great ideas in the chat. And what this is for, though, is that for you to be able to put together when the application process is for you to respond to RFPs and apply for the funds to do some of those great initiatives. I know in St. Thomas, especially when we do a subdivision and we carve through the mountainside, we plant different trees, different plants, grass to hold the soil together. So there's a bunch of different things that we can use and add beautification and that helps with mitigation as well. So those are the things that we want you to send your comments into us so that we can have, and also when we put out the RFPs for you to respond to as well, because these will be great projects for the territory.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, and also Antoinette, she's on the phone, so she won't be able to see the chat room right now.
I was just about to say,
yeah, she's talking from the phone.
If she can go on Facebook and would the chat be available to her on Facebook? Because she just wrote a fantastic suggestion on the chat. If she's listening, the UVI says CES is a fantastic resource and can help guarantee that we plant native species rather than exotic plants, which doing so as well can navigate or impact our native flora. So I hope you're able to hear that response from Amy Dempsey.
You guys are really good at the chat. I'm trying to keep up here. Let me go through maybe one or two more questions in the chat before I let someone else talk. Let me get back to where I was. We already did the fiber active stuff. Greg also mentioned that another example of natural infrastructure is the drainage that they're building by Bovoni. If you're in St. Thomas or seen photos, there was some major damage after the hurricane there. So they're building drainage over in the Bovoni area. Alcido Francis asked, will the revitalization plan be eligible for old and abandoned properties in our local areas, such as Savan? Revitalization. So that's economic resilience and revitalization, if that's what you're referencing. Could anyone give some insight on that? Will the revitalization plan be eligible or applicable for old and abandoned properties in our local areas, such as Savan?
We would love to do those types of projects, but a lot of those buildings that are considered abandoned are owned by individuals, and those individuals would have to agree to participate in such a program. Mrs. Fleming has always been a strong advocate for infill housing, and it has always been a great idea, but we'll need the owners of those properties to participate.
Thank you. Shauna Richards asked, is funding for multifamily housing specifically designated for public housing under VI Housing Authority, or will this funding be available through grants to developers or the community?
Mr. Griffin, you want to go ahead and respond, or you want me to go ahead?
I'll go ahead and take a stab at it, and then you can tell me stop. The majority of the funds for the public housing is dedicated to the Housing Authority for some of their mitigation and the disaster recovery fund. So yes, it is for the Virgin Islands Housing Authority that we've allocated most of the public housing funds. But developers are eligible to participate though.
Afternoon.
Go ahead, Giovanni. I think that was Giovanni speaking.
No, I think that's
No, Liba.
Liba.
Oh, Liba, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Liba Olani. I just have a couple questions. What do you mean by Liba Olani? That's my name. What do you mean by innovative resilient housing? And does say like a house that have not been finished rebuilt, right? After the storm and have applied for the litigation program, and is not qualified, can that house qualify for this program?
You're meaning to complete the construction of a house?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it may not be eligible for Envision tomorrow, but can it be eligible to finish completed in this program?
Anybody want to take that question?
But define what innovative resilient housing for me, please.
I think let's start with that. Let's start with Andrew or Antoinette, if you could start with defining the innovative resilient housing section, and then we'll take a stab at the rest.
So
Sure.
to answer the first initial
Sure.
question, oh, sorry, Andrew, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. So as has been said here before, the allocations are set up with the idea of there being applications with particular projects. So there is some flexibility built into this innovative resilient housing allocation. However, the intent of the way that it's currently written is to look for opportunities so that we are prepared ahead of disasters with potentially some options for people whose homes are destroyed, so that there might be the ability to get them situated in housing locally that has already been prepared, so that it might be used after a disaster while people are working. Is that a fair summary, Mr. Griffith? Do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. And the genesis of the idea is that after a storm, after the previous storms, we had to wait for FEMA to step in and to have blue tarps and to do the STEP program. So this is a fund set aside so that we can be proactive after a storm, so that we can immediately help the people of the territory. And then, Mrs. Fleming, would you like to weigh in on the first part of his question? Because I think you were going to say something on that.
Yeah, only to tell the caller that asked the question is that what we're presenting to you first is the action plan with activities and programs. The actual project that comes on, like under housing, you want to do another homeowner program because you are not eligible under the previous program. We would have to be able to, once mitigation is approved, we would have to then write the policies and procedures that allow that to happen. But we're not to that stage as yet. And potentially that can happen, but we don't want to say, yes, you can, and then give you your hopes up. We want to set good expectations. The expectation from this arena is the review of the action plan for you to understand that we're setting up some monies aside for either housing, economic and infrastructure and other activities relevant to mitigation. We still have a long way to go about actually crafting what projects will actually come out. And we're getting a lot of the feedback from you who just asked the question. And from you, we will then go back and huddle after this call to really craft out what that project looked like. So that's why I say thank you for the comment. I can't really say from this venue, yes, or even no, because I need the information from you of the needs of the community.
And Mr. Liba, what I would ask is that for you to respond, to put your comment in writing to us, and to let us know what aspect of the envision may have disqualified you, for example. And this is just an example. So if it was income and maybe your income was too high to say a project should be created to address such, or if it was some other reason, to put that in writing and let us know so that we can figure out, we can see how we should tweak future programs to be able to assist homeowners who are not able to be assisted in the first couple of projects and programs that we initiated.
Okay, I will do that, yes, because it's almost, that look like a problem and we need to address that, for a lot of us. And just a few of us, a lot of us.
Perfect, and the way we can address it is with comments and from people like you. So I appreciate that, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. And then the last question, please. The last question. Do the Virgin Island or the government have a comprehensive land and water use plan existing? Do we have one?
The territory does not, and this is funds are set aside in planning to be able to do just that. And I know the Department of Planning and Natural Resources are they're interested in applying for the grant.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the information.
Thank you. Senator Hodge had his hand up, but you also have a question here. Are you going to talk about what you posted here?
Yes, I am, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Go right ahead.
Let me answer someone's question first. A question was just asked in reference to the water and use plan. Senator Alicia Barton of St. Croix did have legislation to address it. And there was a number of hearings as well, and DPNR, between DPNR and also Public Works, they're making it happen. Okay, so hopefully within the next year, we'll have one that the 34 legislation will vote on. I live in the historic district, Garden Street, Long Park, exactly. So I want to really speak to the step streets. So I'm going to assume, and some of this wasn't really discussed, but when we refer, I want to refer to an accessible path. So if we look at the step streets in Garden Street, it is an accessible path or walkway or an easement to get to certain homes where the car is actually parked many feet or yards away, and you have to walk up. But those step streets also allow us to have access to other communities. If you wanted to leave Garden Street to go around the field, or if you want to go to a van, it's there. So would the program be able to cover step streets specifically, which would of course provide that access or easement? That's my question.
I'll jump in on this one then, guys. This would be a project that someone would have to develop, and apply and submit to us. So if you have an idea that you're thinking of now, I would say also to put that in writing to us, Senator. And this would be something that either a nonprofit or a governmental agency can apply for the grant to be able to do something like that.
Okay, thank you, Director Griffith.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, Janetta Darden Hill. Actually, I got a message about talking to those people that are on Facebook. If you have a question, if you're viewing this from Facebook, please drop your question in the chat or comment section there on Facebook, and I will get it. I'll address it. I'll read it, and then the appropriate party will answer your question or respond to your feedback. Janetta Darden Hill asked for someone to please expound on what commercial hardening and financing is. That is under economic resilience and revitalization at the tune of 40 million, commercial hardening and financing.
Thanks, Kiva. And I saw that Andrew responded to this comment in the chat as well.
I'm sorry, I'm scrolling
that's
fast
okay. No, it's hard to keep up. But he was letting her know that the commercial hardening and financing is for activities to minimize operational downtime after a disaster, and then to improve and accelerate recovery in commercial areas after a disaster occurs. So this could include commercial and industrial areas of the islands, making them more resilient by helping to mitigate those future disasters.
Thank you. And then she responded, would that encompass buildings? Okay, yes. So they're talking. Sorry, I'm just reading now. Barbara Walsh, is there an email list we can be on for updates such as due dates regarding the action plan? There's not necessarily an email list. You can drop your email. I can add you to our media. Well, I guess it is an email list, but every time we have a major update on any of our plans, we'll issue a press release with that information and update our website. So if you would like to be on my list to send emails and press releases out to, feel free to drop your email there, Barbara. Thank you. Will the slides be available for download after this presentation? It will be uploaded to our website under the mitigation tab. So yes, I can't do it right now, Haley, so I won't be able to drop it in the chat.
And also, Kiva, if you scroll down, just to let everyone know who's on the screen with us, Andrew did put the address of the HFA website on there. So as soon as you do post it on there, this is the address where it can be found.
Yes, he did. Thank you for that. Amy Dempsey said one of the things we really need to address is protecting our incredible historical resources, which continue to be damaged with passing storms and could be damaged by other natural disasters such as flooding or earthquakes. Thank you for that, Amy. And if I could go back to this slide here. The planning slide, it does mention some historic preservation plans. So I would assume that that would be covered. So thank you for that comment. We got some people interested in my email list. Thank you. Keep them coming. Thank you. Thank you. Any comments on Facebook? Let me check. It's a great conversation, guys. I really appreciate it. If you also want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question, feel free to do so.
Good afternoon. This is Frandel.
Hi.
How are you? I see an awful lot of money for planning. Um, and unfortunately with planning, there's very rarely implementation strategy. As you know, that's been our history. So how do we divert some of that planning to implementation strategy and actually seeing things come to fruition? I would hate to think that, you know, $32 million goes into activities that sit on shelves, because, you know, we've got them. We've got a phenomenal land and water use plan that took 5 years to develop, and it sits on a shelf never having been approved. We've got economic development plans. We've got town revitalization plans. We have no implementation strategy and no funding. So is it possible for us to reconfigure this box so that these funds are put to work in my favorite, historic restoration? Because if the towns are restored, St. Croix, St. Thomas, St. John, if they are restored and returned to use, they will then be less likely to be severely damaged in the event of, you know, another hurricane, earthquake, whatever. We can include flood mitigation. We can include all of those things that allow those historic properties that have survived all of these storms, but, you know, may not survive 2 or 3 more with an incredible infusion of capital. Is there a way to rethink or enhance the mitigation strategies so that we are truly hardening our communities in a way that makes them resilient?
And the short answer is yes. And I'm going to ask you to put pen to pad and draft that up for us and submit it.
Okay. All right.
And actually, Mr. Griffin, I wanted to tell Brenda her questioning. She is correct. When we do planning activities, we don't usually include an implementation strategy of how to move those projects forward. But by you mentioning it on this form, you are now putting it into existence because a planning activity will now need to have that done. When you talk about the resiliency of our different towns, that is, again, through this mitigation is feasibly possible because we talk about community resilience and public infrastructure or resilient critical infrastructure. We're looking from the different entities, whether it's a government entity or a nonprofit, for suggestions and ideas on what that looks like. Is it repaving, swaling, trafficking water or directing water away from certain areas? The money is there and is identified as infrastructure to make the towns, as you said, very resilient. But what we're needing from the feedback and from everyone on the call and all the powers that be are the critical projects to make the critical infrastructure work.
And Frendel, as you mentioned, there are a lot of great plans that are sitting on shelves. I think it'd be a great exercise and to put for someone to gather all those plans and let's prioritize them and to implementation. So if you raise your hand, we'd love for you to submit an idea that we can fund.
Yes, Director Griffith, I'll do that. I have like 2 of them on my desk, one dating back to 1992. That you know, it's still relevant. And just so you know, we've applied for technical assistance from the EPA. The EPA is reaching out to nonprofits now because of their, anyway, they've reached out to us to apply for planning technical assistance around these issues because the funds have been there apparently since the hurricanes and have not yet been utilized in the Virgin Islands. So, you know, they got my name and I did the proposal. So, but their key is to make sure that whatever plan has a even more detailed implementation strategy and identifies funding sources.
And that makes sense. And that just goes to show that there are other funds in the territory beyond what the traditional housing and urban development HUD funds that we're talking about today, and beyond the FEMA funds. So for the community to stay engaged in all of these avenues so that we can we can better our territory. To go on to, I see a question there that I think it's appropriate to this discussion in our chat. It says, will nonprofits be considered eligible entities for the economic resilience and revitalization activities and other activities? The short answer is yes. Nonprofits are available to respond to almost every activity. And we're really looking for the nonprofits to take the lead on the homeless and housing initiatives that we have set aside over $23 million for.
Mr. Griffith, this is Brenna with Tetra Tech. I would just add one brief comment on the planning is that in the action plan, a priority for planning are plans that can be implemented. And one reason to have additional funding in the planning category is because the generous long timeline that HUD is given means that some of these more complicated projects may benefit from having a planning process occur prior to them being implemented. And so I think the hope is that in many cases, the plans can actually be implemented with these funds given the timeline. So hopefully that helps with that question as well.
Great, thank you, Brenna. Okay, those questions have been answered. All right. Anyone else has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves or drop them in the chat. It is 4:19. We can end early, but I gave this an hour and a half. But we're still here addressing questions and accepting feedback. If there's anything, any slide that anyone would want me to go back to for a refresher, let me know. But also, just let you know about our website.
This is Sheila over on St. Croix. This might be fun. This might be something that could really be fun if someone is interested in it. But would it be possible to develop a small site where there could be a small structure, maybe an artist could develop it, where each project that has been chosen, every single project in this disaster recovery realm, that when it's completed, a little, like a brick or something is put into the structure, and then when this, it may take 20 years to complete the structure, but everything would be identified, and maybe on the bottom of the stone you could put the price tag, or or however people want to do that, maybe leave that out, but just just like to have a monument, a small monument to the work, and everything that has been completed gets their stone. It could be a little ceremony, and we'll hold everybody's feet to the fire. If someone's receiving $2 million for a project, and when it's completed, then that little stone gets part of the little monument. That might be something that would be spiritually significant for everybody.
That is definitely a really good idea. And I know that all of the information for, I guess when that time comes, because right now we are action plan stage. Once the action plan is submitted and signed off on, then we'll have those entities apply for funds to get their projects going. But even so, that will be definitely a part of our duty to the residents of the Virgin Islands and to HUD to clearly to be transparent in how the monies are being spent and the progress of the projects. But I actually like that idea. It keeps people
I think it would be
abreast and
fun. Yeah,
aware.
and it would be reason, you know, a little ceremony, and it'd be very meaningful, I think, for people who care and really want to do and just help the islands become really, really better and beautiful and all that.
And it holds everyone accountable for all the money that's flowing in post disaster.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So the action plan document is on our website, cdbgdr.vihfa.gov. Unfortunately, the screen that you're seeing on the laptop is not quite there yet or anymore because I swapped it out for the flyer for this event, but I'll swap it back and then you can find the mitigation on there. Or at the top where you see programs, procurement, subrecipients, there is a tab to the left-hand side of programs that says mitigation and all of the information on MIT, including this presentation today, the full plan, and a general idea of what mitigation is on that full landing page. Also, the survey is there, so please, when you get a chance, take the survey. It talks about what do you think if the priority areas are when we're mitigating against future hazards or disasters here in the territory. Okay, still entertaining some questions. It's 4:24 now, so I'll just give it till 4:30 and then we're gonna wrap up. The conversation has been really good so far. Thank you everyone for participating and being engaged. Okay. And I am noting the emails that are on there. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I will be adding you guys to my email list. Any other questions? Feedback?
Ms. Muller, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but not that clearly.
How about now?
Yes.
This is Dr. Fair from Virgin Islands Police Department. Just wanted a little clarity in reference to some of the mitigation. So like we have some of our substations or buildings that may need some mitigation, I guess, with the trees or some overgrown trees to provide some type of, to get rid of in the event that we have another hurricane. So would some of those buildings qualify for this type of grant?
I can take that. This is Brenna with Tetra Tech. If you're talking about the trees and the maintenance activities, then those are not eligible for CDBG-DR or CDBG-MIT. So those would, another source of funding would need to be used for that. If it's more specific to the building or drainage around the building, those are the types of things that might be eligible. Although buildings and office buildings that are used for the general conduct of government usually aren't eligible under CDBG either. So, you know, it could depend on which building you're talking about.
Okay, that makes sense to me. And yes, I was thinking more so about drainage and that type of deal, but I got it. Thank you.
On the Facebook chat, Lucian Downs asked, sorry, can monies be used for beautification projects within the community, for example, murals and planting of native plants and trees around the island? I think we kind of addressed that earlier, but maybe he just jumped on. So can someone address that once more?
Hey, Kiva, Giovanni Moss here. So under the public service category, if it's not a maintenance type project, it could be eligible.
Okay. Also, for those people that are on the chats, I know I asked if you guys are interested, but I would prefer if everyone just drops their email. You guys are a very engaged bunch, so I want to keep you informed. So please, when you have a chance, just drop your email in the chat. Thank you. So back to the timeline on this, the deadline to submit our comments and for us to accept feedback is December 22nd, after which we will incorporate all of the feedback into the plan as necessary and respond to those people who had some burning questions, or maybe some of the questions and comments that you guys have are already addressed in the full plan. And once we do that, we will submit it to HUD by January 4th. And they will, I don't know, maybe Antoinette or Andrew can help me with what HUD's timeline is to get it back to us. I want to say 45 days. I'm not too sure. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah,
And then
you are correct. You are correct,
Okay.
Kiva. Once we submit it in, HUD would have that time period to review and approve it, as well as our certification document that we did send off to HUD earlier part of last week. So we will get information about the approval in 2021. However, after the approval is granted to the territory, HUD would also send the territory a grant agreement with some special conditions related to the mitigation grant, and that may take time to develop and actually transmit to the territory for execution. So giving you the exact timeline of when HUD would actually give us that grant agreement back, I'm not gonna even try to say 2 months or 3 months. It is based on several factors surrounding the territory's ability to initiate the grant.
Gotcha. So we're not gonna give dates, guys, but next year for sure. And then after that, and then we are really a funding source. We have some, HFA has some projects in mitigation that we'll be managing on our own, but we're really just a funding source. So that's why we've appealed to the business community, the nonprofits, and even the government agencies that will be eligible for funding. You can apply to us for the funding of your projects. That's how it goes, right, Antoinette? Am I doing a good job? Please tell me
Yes, I was on mute and I was smiling.
Okay, I see. What time is it? Oh, it's 4:30. But Haley, I'm gonna ask your question last, and then we're gonna wrap up. Which programs? Haley asks, which programs will allow for property acquisition, and which programs will not? I know that HUD allows acquisition. However, the Virgin Islands policies for CDBG-DR disallowed acquisitions under some programs, which negatively affects the ability for nonprofits to actualize innovative projects if they don't already own the appropriate facility or land. Very good question, Haley. I'll read it one more time. It was loaded. Which programs will allow for property acquisition and which programs will not? I know that HUD allows acquisition. However, the Virgin Islands policies for CDBG-DR disallowed acquisition under some programs, which negatively affects the ability of nonprofits to actualize innovative projects if they don't already own the appropriate facility or land.
So Kiva, she is correct. Acquisition by itself is not an eligible activity under CDBG, CDBG-DR, or even MIT. What brings upon the eligibility of the project is when the acquisition allows the entity or whoever has the project to undertake an eligible activity from that location. Like I purchased a facility to undertake a homeless shelter. So it's not just the purchase of the vacant property or the facility, it is what I'm gonna undertake from that activity that makes it eligible. And for as it relates to mitigation, there are instances where based on the use of the facility and how the facility would be able to address the mitigation definition, there are ways that mitigation can be able to do acquisition and an activity, but acquisition by itself it would not be feasible.
Haley, does that help?
Andrew, or you want to take a stab of it, Brenna?
I can unmute myself. This is Haley. Yes, of course, Angela, thank you. Of course, acquisition by itself wasn't what I was imagining. I was imagining acquisition for the intent of taking on an eligible activity. We did receive feedback in CDBG-DR for a proposal that we submitted, which included acquisition for an eligible activity. That acquisition was disallowed in one particular program. And so I just want to make sure that those kind of restrictive policies aren't put into place in the MIT program, because if the activity is eligible, but it necessitates acquiring property to undertake it, you know, most nonprofits aren't sitting on a bunch of vacant land and properties to actualize these activities. So acquisition could be a really important part of that.
Yes.
That's all. So do you know if it'll be disallowed in any of these programs?
I don't, only because I don't know the end use of the acquisition. And that's why I'm saying that. And based upon the policies, like you said, and procedures that will be developed as a result of mitigation, it will tell us what kind of projects we can actually fund. I would ask that you do is send me an email, and so we can have a deeper conversation as to what particular project you are referring to, and I may be able to shed some more light as it relates to mitigation.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, last question, but it's in the chat, and I think it's worth announcing, and then we'll wrap up. Senator Hodge asks, will the funds be first come, first serve, or most important first? Andrew responded and said, not first come. Proposed projects will be evaluated based on their merits. Each activity will have documentation that is to be developed that indicates the key priorities that will be considered. So everything is going to be prioritized. Thank you, Andrew, for that response.
Kiva did, yeah, he provided a response to that.
Okay, so last call for your emails. So we are going to send up a follow-up press release about these mitigation town halls that we're doing. We will be on the radio next week with the same information to reach that set of audience who do not have access to the internet or on Facebook. But this is the last virtual town hall-like meeting over the Zoom platform. But I do also encourage you to send your comments to the mitigation@vihfa.gov email. Even if it's something that you mentioned verbally over this live meeting now, it would help us a lot if you formulate those thoughts into email so that we can have your words for your words and include them into the plan. And then at this time, I will have Director Griffith. Are you still on the line? Would you like to close for us?
Of course. Thank you so much, Kiva. And thank you, VIHFA team. You guys did a great job as always. And thank you for everyone who participated. The questions were engaged. The comments were well thought out. And these are things that we can actually, actionable things that we can actually move forward with. So we really, truly appreciate that. As Kiva said, please send your comments to mitigation@vihfa.gov. This is the only way that we'll be able to perfect this plan to make sure that it's usable and actionable for the people of the territory. We're gonna be in touch with you. You're now on our email list. So you're gonna get all of the information, and ask that you stay in contact with us, because this $774 million that goes to mitigation, the other $1 billion that goes to disaster recovery, and additional $64 million that goes to the electrical grid. That's $1.9 billion coming to the territory through housing and urban development. And it's only with conversation, close partnership with the territory will we be able to say, after this 6 and then 12-year time frame, that we've spent this money wisely. This territory should look remarkably different and better with this infusement of capital coming into it. And we can only do that with you. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch, okay? Thank you, Ms. Muller. Good night, everyone.